She thought it was just one final conversation, but that moment became the point where her life quietly disappeared forever. Auburn, California, was the kind of town people described as safe without hesitation. Nestled above the fog and below the snowline, it was surrounded by forests, steep cliffs, and winding dirt roads that blended quietly into the landscape. Life there moved at an unhurried pace. Families knew each other. Teenagers grew up together. Serious crime was rare enough to feel distant, almost impossible. No one imagined that beneath the stillness of the wooded trails, a crime was already taking shape. One that would shatter the town's sense of security forever. In the summer of 2003, Auburn was home to 17-year-old Justine Vander, a girl remembered by nearly everyone who met her. She was vibrant and expressive, full of confidence and energy. Justine loved to laugh, loved to stand out, and loved the idea of becoming something more than what was expected of her. She designed her own clothes, sewed her own shirts, and talked openly about a future in fashion and beauty. To her family, she was a bright presence, a source of warmth and noise and movement within the house. Justine shared a particularly close bond with her older sister, Christine. Only a year and a half apart, the two had grown up inseparable, moving through childhood and adolescence side by side. Christine later described Justine as her best friend, the person who knew her better than anyone else. To their parents, Dawn and Lynette Vander, Justine was deeply loved, fiercely protected, and trusted. She was responsible, predictable, and honest, traits that would later make her disappearance all the more terrifying. At 15, Justine began dating Danny Beaser. At first, the relationship seemed intense but unremarkable. Teenagers often fall hard, and Danny quickly became a constant presence in Justine's life. He spent so much time at the Vander home that he was treated almost like another child in the family. Dawn Vander helped him find work, welcomed him into their routines, and even gave him a key to the house. To Danny, who came from a less stable background, the Vander family represented something he had never truly known: structure, affection, and belonging. But as time passed, the nature of the relationship began to change. Danny grew increasingly possessive. He wanted to know where Justine was at all times, who she spoke to, and what she said. He monitored her phone calls and text messages, questioned her friendships, and reacted poorly when she spent time away from him. What initially seemed like devotion slowly revealed itself as control. Justine began to feel suffocated, though she did not immediately share the full extent of her frustration with her family. By early 2003, the strain was becoming more obvious. Justine was growing up, thinking about graduation and her future. Danny, however, appeared stuck, unable to imagine a life in which he was not at the center of hers. His fear of losing her began to dominate his behavior. That fear intensified after Justine took a spring break trip to Florida. While there, she met a Navy sailor. The interaction was brief and innocent, but it left a strong impression. When Justine returned home, she talked about the man openly, describing him as kind and attractive. To her, the experience was eye-opening, a glimpse into a wider world. To Danny, it was devastating. He became convinced that Justine was cheating on him. Instead of addressing the issue directly, Danny spiraled into obsession. He talked about needing proof, about catching her in a lie. At one point, he even asked someone close to Justine to secretly record her conversations by wearing a wire. The request was refused, but it revealed how far his jealousy had gone. His fear was no longer abstract. It had become an obsession that shaped his every thought. Another presence in Danny's life further fueled this instability: Brandon Fernandez. Brandon was Danny's close friend, someone he admired and followed. Intelligent and confident, Brandon had a reputation for being manipulative and calculating. Together, the two shared a troubling fascination with violence. They talked openly about murder, about how to get away with it, about beating polygraph tests. These conversations were not framed as jokes. They were detailed and deliberate, unsettling to those who later learned of them. Brandon hated Justine. He believed she had changed Danny and ruined their friendship. Justine, in turn, viewed Brandon as a negative influence and pressured Danny to cut ties with him. For nearly a year, the two men drifted apart. But by late 2002, they reunited and decided to live together. That decision marked a turning point. With Danny and Brandon under the same roof, resentment and obsession fed off one another. Brandon spoke openly about his disdain for Justine, calling her manipulative and controlling. Danny's jealousy found reinforcement in Brandon's words. Together, they created an echo chamber where suspicion, anger, and entitlement grew unchecked. As Labor Day weekend of 2003 approached, Justine's mindset shifted. She began confiding in friends that she was ready for a fresh start. She spoke about ending the relationship, about moving forward with her life. To those around her, it sounded like the natural progression of a young woman discovering her independence. To Danny, it sounded like abandonment. In his mind, Justine's desire to leave was not simply a breakup. It was a betrayal. If she no longer belonged to him, then he was losing everything. The idea of her choosing a future without him became unbearable. Several days before Justine disappeared, a man named Matt Schreiber was riding his horse along a wooded trail outside Auburn. The area was remote, far from the main road. As he passed through the brush, something unusual caught his eye: a freshly dug hole. The dirt was disturbed, the edges sharp and recent. At the time, Schreiber tried to rationalize what he had seen. Perhaps someone had been working in the area. Perhaps it was nothing. Still, the image lingered with him, unsettling in a way he could not quite explain. He continued his ride, unaware of the significance the site would later hold. On the evening of September 1, 2003, the Vander family returned home from their summer house in the Sierra Nevada mountains. They shared a simple meal together, unaware that it would be their last ordinary night as a family. Before going to bed, Lynette kissed Justine on the forehead and told her she loved her. Later, Don spoke with his daughter on the phone before leaving for work early the next morning. It was the last time either of them would hear her voice. When Lynette entered Justine's bedroom the following morning, the room was empty. The bed appeared untouched. The family dog lay calmly on top of the covers. The front door of the house was open. Justine's truck was gone. She had taken no money, no identification, and none of the belongings she would need to disappear willingly. For a girl known for her responsibility and routine, the scene made no sense. Panic set in almost immediately. Search efforts began at once. The Vander family mobilized the community, organizing volunteers and spreading flyers across town. Pink ribbons, Justine's favorite color, were tied to trees and lampposts. Auburn came together in hope, clinging to the belief that the teenager would be found alive. Danny participated in the early searches. He wore missing person t-shirts and spoke publicly about his concern, presenting himself as a devastated boyfriend, desperate for answers. To many, his grief appeared genuine. But behind the scenes, investigators were beginning to notice inconsistencies. Justine's truck was soon discovered at a park-and-ride lot near Interstate 80, roughly 5 miles from her home. The vehicle was locked and parked deliberately. Detectives considered the possibilities. Had she met someone there? Had she left town? Had she been taken? One detail stood out above all others. Justine's cell phone had last registered activity in the same area where her truck was found, and then went silent. As days passed with no sign of the missing teenager, the hope that once fueled the search began to erode. Quietly, law enforcement shifted its focus. The answers they were looking for, they believed, were not hidden in the forest, but among the people who knew Justine best. And somewhere beyond the tree line, beneath disturbed earth and scattered debris, the truth waited to be uncovered. In the days following Justine Vander's disappearance, Auburn remained suspended in a strange and unsettling silence. To outsiders, it was just another missing person case. Tragic, yes, but not uncommon. To those who knew her, the fear was heavier, more personal. Something felt wrong from the very beginning. Search teams combed through wooded areas near Interstate 80, following tips that led nowhere. Volunteers walked trails, checked ravines, and called her name into the quiet hills. Her family clung to hope, believing that Justine, resourceful and strong-willed, might still be alive. But with each passing day, the optimism faded. Investigators began retracing Justine's final known movements. Her car, abandoned at a park-and-ride, stood out as the first major red flag. There were no signs of a struggle, no obvious explanation for why she would leave it behind. Friends insisted she would never simply disappear without telling someone. Attention soon turned to the people closest to her, those who knew her habits, her fears, and her secrets. At the center of that circle was her former boyfriend, Danny Beaser. To detectives, Danny appeared cooperative, even concerned. He spoke of Justine with practiced sadness, describing their relationship as complicated but loving. Yet subtle inconsistencies began to surface. His timeline did not always align with known facts. His emotional responses felt rehearsed, too measured for someone who had allegedly lost the woman he loved. Behind closed doors, investigators dug deeper into Danny's past. What they uncovered painted a darker picture. Friends described Danny as intensely possessive. During the relationship, he had monitored Justine's phone calls, questioned her friendships, and expressed paranoia about her leaving him. Text messages revealed frequent arguments, many centered around accusations of betrayal and abandonment. Justine had tried to distance herself. She had talked about starting over, about reclaiming her independence. To Danny, that independence represented something far more threatening than rejection. It meant losing control. As detectives continued their inquiry, another name emerged: Brandon Fernandez. Brandon was not Justine's friend. In fact, he openly disliked her. He and Danny shared a bond forged not through mutual respect, but through resentment and grievance. Conversations between the two men, recovered later, revealed disturbing patterns, discussions laced with hostility, fantasies of violence, and a shared narrative that blamed Justine for Danny's unhappiness. Investigators would later determine that these were not idle words. The break in the case came when authorities received information pointing to a remote area outside Auburn land, rarely visited, far from main roads. When search teams arrived, they found signs that the ground had been disturbed. Beneath the soil lay the truth. Justine Vander's body was discovered buried in a shallow grave. The scene told a story of planning, not impulse. Tools had been used, efforts had been made to conceal the remains. This was not the aftermath of an accident. It was the result of deliberate intent. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. Hope gave way to grief, and grief quickly turned into outrage. Someone had not only taken Justine's life, they had tried to erase her existence. Forensic evidence soon linked the burial site back to Danny and Brandon. Traces of soil, inconsistencies in their statements, and digital records began to form an undeniable pattern. Phone data placed them near the location. Messages revealed coordination before and after Justine vanished. Confronted with mounting evidence, Brandon was the first to break. During interrogation, the weight of guilt became too heavy to bear. He admitted to helping Danny carry out the plan. According to his account, Danny had convinced him that Justine was a threat, someone who would ruin his life, expose him, leave him broken. Together, they lured Justine under the pretense of a conversation, a chance for closure. What she believed would be a final discussion turned into her last moments alive. Brandon described how Danny attacked her, how fear and disbelief filled her final seconds. He spoke of the burial with visible remorse, though his words could never undo the damage. Danny was arrested shortly afterward. Unlike Brandon, Danny maintained his innocence. He denied planning the murder, denied intending harm, denied responsibility even as evidence continued to stack against him. To investigators, his refusal to accept accountability revealed the same trait that had defined his relationship with Justine: an inability to let go and an unwillingness to face consequences. The trial that followed was long and emotionally charged. Prosecutors laid out a narrative of obsession and control. They presented text messages, witness testimonies, and forensic findings that demonstrated premeditation. This was not a crime of passion. It was the culmination of months of resentment, fueled by entitlement and fear of abandonment. The defense attempted to shift blame, arguing emotional instability and manipulation, but the jury was unconvinced. In the courtroom, Justine's family listened as her final moments were described in painful detail. Friends spoke of her kindness, her resilience, her dreams of a future that would never come. Each testimony reinforced the same truth: Justine Vander was not a villain, not a threat. She was a woman who wanted her life back. When the verdict was delivered, the room fell silent. Both men were found guilty. Sentencing brought a measure of justice, but not closure. No prison term could restore what had been taken. No verdict could erase the fear and suffering Justine endured. Her death became a grim reminder of the dangers hidden within seemingly ordinary relationships, of how control can masquerade as love, of how warning signs, when ignored, can escalate into irreversible tragedy. In the years since, Justine's story has been shared not for shock, but for awareness. She is remembered not for how she died, but for who she was. A woman who tried to leave, who chose herself and paid the ultimate price for it. And in the quiet hills outside Auburn, where the truth was finally unearthed, her story continues to echo a solemn warning of what can happen when obsession is allowed to grow unchecked, and when the desire to control becomes more powerful than the value of a human life.